This short video on using the Open TermHub Github project to load a Fire terminology server in just a few minutes. This is a publicly accessible GitHub project that demonstrates our open source Fire terminology server that can be deployed as a container to run in a variety of environments. This has a couple of tutorials that take you through step-by-step instructions of working with sandbox data in order to stand up a service and have a look at what it's doing. This sandbox data are some mini versions of important terminologies in US healthcare like SNOMED, ArcStorm, ICD-10, and LOINC. And there are files that are local to this project. So with this first step-by-step instructions, you don't need to do anything else except follow along. So if we come in here, you can see that there's two options to run a container. You can either just sort of build the code and run it yourself, or you can run the latest Docker image and then follow through with essentially the same steps. Once you have a container up and running, you can look at the Swagger documentation for the native API as well as the R4 and R5 Fire terminology services APIs. Then this tutorial takes you through a series of commands to load data for these various terminologies into the service, including a map set and a value set. And then once the data is loaded, you can use network calls to essentially ask about information. There's a Postman collection or a variety of curl commands here that you can simply just run if you have curl and JQ installed that will show you different aspects of what can be done with the API. This is the native API, then there's Fire R4, and then repeated for Fire R5. So you kind of see how all the different APIs serve up that sandbox data. And then at the end here, there's an embedded terminology browser in this product so you can see the content that's actually loaded in your browser by pointing it at the running container itself. The other option here is step-by-step instructions to use syndication feature instead of the local sandbox data files. Syndication is a mechanism to essentially connect a running container with a TermHub project that contains data, and it uses a feed mechanism to pull that data down and load itself. So on startup here of the container, which again you can either run yourself or you can use the Docker image, but we specify this sandbox API key, which is documented here at the very top. This connects to a public sandbox project that has the same data that the first tutorial loads. So, this essentially loads the data for you instead of you loading it yourself, but it's a chance to kind of see both ways of managing information. The rest of this step-by-step tutorial is essentially the same. You can look at the Swagger. You can then use Postman or just straight curl calls to look at the native terminology API, the Fire R4 or Fire R5 APIs, and then finally you can go and look at the content as it's loaded into the browser. Graduating from here to a full-scale deployment is a little bit more work, but these give you the sort of idea about how to do it. And there is documentation for that that's out of the scope of this video. So thank you for taking a quick look at the Open TermHub GitHub project.